Have you ever met someone that you think is interesting and wish you could sit down and have a longer conversation with? Well, we believe what starts here at LSU changes the world and builds the future, and we invite you to listen in on this stage of its construction. Join us on Campus Connections with Colin Raby as we find and learn from student leaders, builders, thinkers, and change makers on 91.1 KLSU Baton Rouge. It's all good. Welcome everyone tuning in to listen live to this episode of Campus Connections with me, your host, Colin Raby. Joining me today is our production manager and co-host, Julius Pilata.
Hello, hello. Oh, hello, hello.
And also joining us today is Sam Staggs, a dual mechanical engineering and theater major with a concentration in performing arts, who's been very involved in the LSU community, notably within student government, where she has been a member of all three branches of student government, and notably has been Speaker of the LSU Senate for the past year, serving with 2 different SPTs. Welcome to the show. Anything else you'd like to say for an introduction?
Ooh, no. Happy finals, everyone. Truly. No, that was good. That was a solid introduction. That was great. Thank you.
Awesome. So, other than Senate, what other involvements have you had? I know there's been a couple.
I'm in Kappa Alpha Theta sorority. I was in leadership about 2 years ago, so not as much recently. I was president a year ago of University Theater Alliance, so UDA in the School of Theater. On and off with SWE, SPM, kind of like around. I think those are the main ones. Just like School of Theater in general, School of Theater Ambassadors, which no one knows is a thing anyway. Yeah, pretty much that, yeah.
And a point of information, SPT is Speaker Pro Tempore of the Student Government Senate. And
Yes.
I just felt like using Robert's Rules of Orders.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
But we're definitely going to get into some of that later. But first, something that we were joking about before the show. Obviously, I think whenever anyone hears dual mechanical engineering and performing arts theater, there's a general question mark that pops up. So how'd that come about, and how do you see the value in that?
Yeah, it's actually, I feel like it's never as interesting as people want it to be. So it's really, I knew I wanted to do theater for sure. So when I came to LSU, started in theater. If you don't know anything about it, it's directed at college. So I was never in UCFY. So I pretty much started off taking all theater classes. I think I took 5 my first semester. And so I just remember kind of missing like science and math and missing the creativity that came with that, and not having the structure I did in high school of having all of it together. And so I really went to the Career Center and I said, I want to add another degree. And so they kind of just asked, what do you want to do? And I said, I miss like science and math. I always liked physics. I did well in high school. So they said, okay, just do a physics degree. And so I did physics my first semester of sophomore year. Hated it. Not in a bad way. I love physics, but it was just so theoretical. And I just remember the lab was so boring. I didn't like it. It was basically just Excel, like learning Excel, and I just never did. I was really bad at it. And so I went back to the Career Center and I said, okay, so I didn't like that. And they said, okay, why? And I just remember saying I wanted to be like hands-on. I want to like build things. And they said, okay, engineering. Didn't even question it. Went to the like college. I went to PFT, talked to the mechanical engineering department. And they said, are you sure? And then they kept asking if I was going to switch from theater to mechie. And I said, no, I want to add it. And they just kind of didn't understand why. And I said, there is no reason. I just want to do both. And then I started my second semester of sophomore year taking ME classes. So with like CM 2030, I think that's the name of it, and like calculus, all of my like math classes. So I think it's never I didn't go into college knowing that that's what I wanted to do. I just really missed math and science, and I liked the creative aspect that both of them gave me. And so I don't really see a way of using them both, because I don't do technical theater, which is also a very big question that I get asked. So I just really just liked both of them. It's really kind of whatever job opportunities I have when I graduate for what I want to do, and I've just enjoyed being in both of the classes and both of my majors the whole time.
You know, that's really interesting that you mentioned that you missed the creative aspect of science and math. You know,
yes.
A lot of people, when they think of science and math, right, they think of kind of dull calculations and formulas and kind of boring. I guess, can you explain a little more what you mean by the creativity of science and math?
I think people forget that it still is kind of an art when you think about like math as a concept. I mean, when things are derived, it's basically, to me, it kind of feels like someone's creativity of imagining all of the different ways these things can happen. And I mean, that's kind of the whole point of science and math in general, is coming up with all of these different ways to explain every physical thing around us. And so you have to be somehow creative in any aspect to do math or science. I think probably the smartest people I know in math and science are also very creative in other aspects, in music or art or like theater. And I think that being able to think like that makes it way more interesting when you're viewing it as a way of like, as an art of in itself. And so, I mean, and also music, when you think about it, is also, it's just waves, and like it's science and it's math. And so I think that's always my thought process of, if you're going into the mindset of this is so interesting and creative and how many different ways can I solve these problems, you're going to have more fun than just sitting here and going, oh, here's numbers and this formula and this. Because I mean, you also have to memorize so much stuff of all of the different equations, and there's like 8 different units and all of the ways you derive the units and every derivation of everything. And so yeah, so it's a creative field, and I think people kind of like don't give it enough credit for being a creative field for the sciences and math.
Definitely. I mean, and that's even a tenet that most people don't realize about kind of the scientific method, right?
Yeah.
The very first step is you got to come up with the better question, a really good question. And some of the great scientists are the ones that have had the creativity and the insight to look at the same thing that other people have been looking at forever and just see a different question. You know, that's kind of the very stereotypical progression from Newton to Einstein, is Newton laid out these equations and people are like, all right, cool, that works. And then for, 100, 200 years, somewhere there, everyone just kind of looked at that and was like, yeah, that sounds good. And Einstein came along and looked at it a little different, asked a bigger question, asked, all right, why do these seem to break down at really high masses or really fast speeds? And took the exact same information. There was no real new information. Most of the new information came post-Einstein, but he just looked at the question differently. And that's where you get that creativity of, you can see, like currently we're both in a measurements and instrumentation class, and you can see it as just these boring lab experiments and all these waves and things, or exactly like you described when you're, at the concert, right? And then you get that kind of destructive interference where things go and everything like that. Well, if you know how waves work, if you know kind of the fundamental principles behind it, you could avoid all that.
Yeah. I definitely think it makes you look at the world like differently, and being able to see how much effort, energy goes into all of these things. And I think it made me appreciate the arts more too, because of how much goes into it. So I know like music is so difficult, and like music engineering is so difficult, and theater technology and sound and lighting and projections, it's all just basically like equations that people don't realize that these people have to know too. And there's just so much more intersection than I think people will ever realize unless they're doing something like this. And so I think it's made me appreciate both of them just so much more, even if it's not how I'm going to use my degree. It's just so interesting. And so yeah.
Absolutely. And kind of add on to how you kind of wanted to do engineering for the artsiness of it. When I set out into engineering, I did it because I enjoyed, how math and science can be used to, exactly calculate things like, throwing a ball. You can exactly figure out every aspect of it. And I thought it was a cool way to learn more about, our world, and to, once I got into the classes like sophomore design, and you learn the CM 1020 class you mentioned, where you get to do 3D modeling, there's a lot of creativeness. And whenever you're working on, say, a robotics project, building a combat robot, there's a lot of creative decisions you can make. And it also helps, to go on to what Colin was saying, having a creative approaches to problems. Once you know that science and that engineering, those principles, you can apply them in really creative ways. We were talking to Nick Fruin last week, who's applying artificial intelligence to radio.
Oh.
Yeah, it really cool stuff.
That's
but
insane.
Just that's kind of one of the reasons I decided to do bioengineering, was I want to do more stuff with agriculture. I feel like there's a lot of creative solutions to, irrigation problems in California, or just a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
Well, and even just the I don't know, I guess a deeper level of, a lot of the arts, right? It's about creating something that's beautiful, right? Something that is inspirational, something that creates certain patterns of meaning within people that normally they don't really know how to explain. Like when you watch a really elegant play, or when you there was a gospel choir the other day that performed on campus, and like you as an audience member, sometimes you're watching this creative endeavor, and you feel this inspiration, you feel this sense of profound beauty, And you don't know where that comes from. That just kind of happens. And in the engineering world, the very formulaic approach, even if you're, building a robotic or something like that, there's a lot of examples in the modern world of where we come up with a pragmatic solution, but sometimes the pragmatic completely does away with the beautiful. And that's, you look at kind of human civilization for a while. There used to be a much more of an emphasis on, okay, yeah, we're going to build this giant building, but we're also going to make it beautiful.
Yeah.
We're going to do this great thing, but also it's going to be awe-inspiring, right? Whereas now you might get just a square building it works. It's very pragmatic.
Yeah.
But when the pragmatic falls way to the beautiful, when you have something that is awe-inspiring on that kind of artistic level that is also functional because of the engineering methodology behind it, that has to be the ultimate expression of what we should be shooting for in society. And so being able to combine the two seems like definitely something that we need more of.
I definitely think that's a major reason that I think engineering can be so interesting, is because you can have all of the elements you need to build something that is functional and efficient, but you can have all the things to make it cool. I mean, race cars are so cool looking, but they still work aerodynamically very well, but they're still insanely cool feats of engineering and design. And I think it's same for like rockets. Maybe rockets are they're maybe not the prettiest, but you still can watch it go and you're like, that's insane to see it go. And I think sometimes maybe the design of the function isn't always the prettiest, but it happening is still such an awe-inspiring event for people to watch. And I think it's just such an interesting thought of wishing that our degree had more classes where they kind of push the creativity aspect of it more, of these are different ways to design things and not everything has to be 100% efficient, because this isn't a 100% efficient world. And when you're designing it for people have emotions and feelings and thoughts about things, and they're not always going to care if something looks bad. They're not going to care as much if it's all the way perfect, if it's not something that they're going to have a good feeling about.
Right.
And I think that's something that is never taught as much as I want it to be in our classes, and it's always very, here's the answer, here's your textbook, here's your question, you solve the problem.
Right.
And I think having the mix of two and having a lot of people who have the desire to make it more fun will definitely improve the future of wanting to make things just better and more fun. And I think because engineering is really fun, and I wish people would think about that more.
Well, it's fun that you mentioned that the rocket not being a cool design. It reminded me of Elon Musk. He had this rocket that he designed, and he wanted to make it pointy at the top, just as a joke, as a reference. I forget what the movie's called, The Dictator.
The Dictator, yeah.
Because he was need to make it pointy. So that's an example of, just making something just for the heck of it, just because it's fun.
Sometimes things are fun.
I think what Julie's talking about, so when they were building Starship, originally the most aerodynamic design for Starship had a much more rounded nose cone.
Yes.
Just if you do all of the fluid analysis and everything, the most efficient was this rounded nose cone. But, his companies generally tend toward, they have meme elements to them. And someone started joking in the office, well, it's got to be pointy, kind of referencing the Dictator movie. And he said, okay, make it pointy. They're like, well, it won't be super efficient. He's like, will it work? Yes, make it pointy.
There you go.
And so they made it more pointy.
If you have the money, sometimes you just have to go for the funnier option.
Yeah.
Because life is short, man. I'm trying to have fun.
Yeah, and we see that. I mean, we see that even in SG to a certain extent.
100%.
Where someone will do something funny, and sometimes the funny outlasts the what is actually maybe making the most practical impact.
Yeah.
People might forget that in 4 years, but people think of the funny.
Like giving a debate in a totally different language.
Oh, God. I do remember
with
that.
JKL, yes.
So that was,
yes.
Gave his whole argument in French.
Yes, we were discussing whether or not to put English and Spanish on different signs, and some of the Francophiles in the room said that there should also be French on there, and so one of them stood up and gave their entire debate in French, which on one hand was impressive, but on the other we didn't understand it, so it wasn't very effective.
I think I got a few of the words, perchance, maybe, if that.
I didn't.
I remember the vibe of it happening, but not actually what happened.
So, we mentioned a little bit how the understanding of mechanical engineering can bolster and sometimes supplement artistic endeavor because you understand some of the physical principles at play. And we talked a little bit about how within society, obviously combining the artistic with the engineering is good. Has there been any way that having started in art and design and theater, do you think has helped you in your mechanical engineering degree thus far?
I think the biggest is communication for sure, and just the aspect of knowing that most of the time when you're talking about these projects and explaining things to people, they're not going to be engineers. They're going to be people, or they're going to be companies, and the people you're explaining it to would rather you be personable and it be nice to look at than sitting there talking at them and telling them point by point exactly what's happening. And so I think I got very lucky that in all of my classes where we present something, I've always done very well in them because I've had such a past with theater. I mean, I've done theater my whole life, and then just continuing with that in college of having so much practice with speaking in front of people and knowing how to word things in a way that is interesting for people to listen to, because it doesn't always matter. You can say the most complicated words in the room and use the dictionary and a thesaurus, but if you can't use your tone and your pitch and actually say it in an interesting way, no one's going to listen. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that's been helpful. And then also just time management of being in theater, because it is also a very time management degree that people probably don't think a lot about. And so having started already having to use time management in those classes was very helpful when I got into my engineering classes later, of knowing how much time things take, knowing the times that I'm good at studying and I am capable of being a person. And so I think in that aspect for sure, but honestly, the creativity I think has just always been there from being in theater. So I don't think my college classes and starting in theater really impacted that as much as I think it would have, because like I said, I didn't do like any technical theater or anything. It was really just performance.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know that's been something that I've been talking with even some of the senior design groups about is, some senior design groups have very, very good projects and very intricate projects, and they put a lot of time and work, and then the presentation is disastrous, and they just get absolutely skewered for it, right? The hundreds of hours they put in this project can be heavily degraded from a grade standpoint by just a disastrous presentation. And on the flip side, I know one or two groups that, like, I know one group in particular that said that they all showed up. So most of the group showed up, maybe in slacks and a polo, and maybe but they all showed up fully suited and ready to go with a very fleshed out PowerPoint. And they said, our project was not the best. We know that we're working with other people whose projects are way more intricate, who put a lot more time. We just presented it really well, and they got one of the best grades in this senior design class. And so definitely the effective communication. I mean, that's effective scientific communication has been a reoccurring theme on the show, whether it is to adults in thinking about different policy and scientific communications there, or whether it's to children in trying to get people interested in science and engineering and technology to further progress things. I think that's a good point that a lot of people don't think of, is the ability to effectively convey something like that rather than just being good at it.
Yeah. I also think that it kind of goes back to the engineering is fun. And if you're not having fun with the project you're doing and you don't have a comfortable understanding of what it is, you're never going to be able to present it in a way that makes other people care about it. And I think when you care about something and you're passionate about it and you have a love for it, it really shows, and that just helps people think that, one, it makes them believe you know what you're talking about, even if you maybe don't as much, and it also just kind of shows the humanity that comes with engineering that people don't always get in a classroom setting because of how, one, structured everything is all the time, and just students are stressed constantly. And so when you're constantly studying for tests and trying to memorize formulas, you kind of forget that when you leave here, you're going to be working with people to design things for humans and for humanity in the world. And when you remember that and you bring it in, I think it, one, makes things less stressful because you're a human, you make mistakes, things happen. And it also just makes it more entertaining for other people, and it makes it more understanding for those who aren't constantly thinking in equations and math and science and all of the formulas that we do. And I think I think effective communication is probably the most important thing that you can learn in college and engineering.
And it's
for sure.
And it's what industry's looking for. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a reason why. So I was shocked recently last year when I looked at everyone that got the effective communicator badge that LSU has. And I'm thinking, all right, it's probably going to be a whole bunch of mass comm or a whole bunch of poli-sci or things like. No. Half of the list was engineering.
Yeah.
And granted, that's only maybe 30 people, right, out of the entire college. But the fact that half of that list was engineering, I'm like, all right, what's up with that? Well, it turns out part of the reason why they've been pushing this effective communicator medal within the College of Engineering is because all these employers, whether they be big chemical companies, Dow, Shell, Chevron, all that, whether they be just private engineering firms, are saying, hey, you guys are pumping out people that know engineering, right?
Yeah.
They can do the calculations. However, we want people that can both do the calculations that we want to work with that can also convey the message of what they're doing both to their upper management and to the clients that we're working with. And so, that's just something that I think we're seeing a broader, almost cultural thing from just rote kind of engineers as these human calculators to engineering practices that are a lot more communicative and I don't know, professional on the level of enjoyable.
Yeah. I think people also just want to work with someone that they would want to be friends with in a sense and hold a conversation and not just show up to work, do the work, go home. Because at the end of the day, you're still spending 40 hours a week with these people. And if you don't think that there's someone that you can talk to and have a conversation with and is enjoyable to be around, kind of doesn't matter if you can do the calculations because then you're just kind of sitting there and, like you said, being a human calculator. And that's really not... We've grown so much as a society that's not needed anymore. You need people who have personalities along with everything else that is needed. And I think LSU is doing a better job of really, like you said, pushing that and making it more apparent with grading people harsher when their presentations aren't good and they're not presented well and they're fumbling over words or they're nervous or they're not really connecting with the material or the audience. And I think it's a good thing that they're really focusing and being like, part of your presentation grade is the presentation. Even if everything you did was 100% right, you're sitting here and speaking at us for 30 minutes and none of it, one in right, ear out the other. And so I think really pushing that will really help people understand that companies are looking for humans and people with multifaceted personalities along with all of the engineering that we've learned the past however many years we've been here.
That's true. So 5, 6?
I'll be 6 next year.
Gotcha.
Into 5 now.
It's engineering, and that's the funny thing I find is if you talk to anyone technical in like anyone, if you're a freshman coming into college, they're going to tell you, oh, it's a 4-year degree. Yet if you talk to anyone that actually the office of the dean of students office or anyone that actually works with students on the day to day, you say engineering, they go, oh, that's a 5-year degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just, it's known as a 5-year degree. And so especially having that 1 year, still right on.
Yeah. For sure, yeah. The starting my sophomore year, for sure, they basically looked at me and they said, you're not leaving anytime soon. And I said, that's okay.
Well, and you're getting 2 degrees in 6 years, one of which is an engineering degree and the other which is a theater degree, which I know those classes, they might not have, tomes of pages for a single problem, but I'm sure you spend a lot of time outside of the theater class as well, preparing for stuff. And what do you think the time commitment, because I've heard for different majors, there's different amounts of I know for architecture and design type majors, there's a lot of time in the studio. Is it very similar to that in theater?
It definitely is depending on the classes you're taking. So for performance specifically, I got very lucky where a lot of my theater classes happened many years ago, and so kind of for the past year and a half or year to my next year when I graduate, they are significantly more spread out. So I've only been in about 1 to 2 theater classes, but I guess for right now, so I'm in a voice class, and so I have about 6 monologues that I've had to be doing for this class, and so I also honors optioned it, so I added another monologue on top of that, and so it's a mix of contemporary text, Shakespeare text, Oscar Wilde. We have to do 1 monologue in a British accent that we have to learn a British accent because I cannot do one. I'm a little mortified about that one. I'm going to be really honest.
Cheerio.
You should do the rest of the show in a British accent.
I have not learned how to do it yet. I am very stressed. There's another one. We did a second Shakespeare one that we all had to do. and then there was one that I picked for honors. And so for me, I've always been very good at memorizing things, but then you're not just memorizing it, you're breaking it down completely. You have to read the play most of the time of the monologue to actually understand the context of what you're doing. You are analyzing the monologue like line by line. You're finding the rhetorical devices of it. You are trying it in different ways for like tone, like pitch, and just different ways to do it. And so it probably won't take me as long to do all of those things as it would everything I'm doing for my like fluids class, but it's definitely one of those classes where you could probably spend a solid 5 to 6 hours a week on if you're really doing it and you're dedicated and you want to do it well, because anyone can read a monologue and not everyone can do it well. And I think that's where the discrepancy comes in of, oh my God, theater's so easy. But like, it's easy if you're just thinking about it of, oh, you're memorizing this monologue. Well, that's great, but was it good? Or it was bad? Would you have gotten cast in the play? Probably not.
It's easy until you watch a whole bunch of people try out for a position and you realize there are only a couple people that can actually perform it believably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So engineering definitely is a more time commitment major, but I think it also depends on if you're in a show. And so I know for me, I directed a lab show last semester in the fall, and we started rehearsals about the second week of school, and then we closed the second week of October. So it was about a 7 week process, minus everything that I did over the summer with my design team of actually designing, I read the play probably like 20 times, of like annotating it, blocking the entire thing, having production meetings every single week. And so that was not even counting the 20 hours a week of rehearsal time that you have to have, which is about, they recently changed it, which is really great. So now we can only have 20 hours of rehearsal, but before then I think it could be up to about 30. So like my freshman year in our town, I wasn't a main character, so it wasn't as important. But I think we could rehearse Monday through Saturday, and it was 4-hour rehearsals.
Jeez.
So before that, I think it was a little harder, but I wasn't in engineering then. But when I was directing, I mean, obviously I was directing, so I had to be there the whole time. But it was Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday for 4 hours. Yeah, for 4 hours. It was 5 days for 20 hours. So it was 6 to 10, pretty much almost every single day of the week. And that's what people do most of their time. They're at School of Theater because you want to be in a show pretty much the whole time you're here. So you're adding all of that on top of all of the work that you should be doing for those performing classes of monologues. Plus, if you're in an acting class, you have monologues and scenes for those classes. And if you're in like a theater history class, for theater history, you read like 2 plays a week. And like there are 3 theater history classes. And that's actually a really hard class. Theater history is very difficult. Theater history 2 was probably my worst theater class.
A lot of reading.
It was a lot of reading.
Yeah.
And like a lot of it's like ancient text. And so like, I don't know how well y'all like Shakespeare, but personally, I do not really like Shakespeare that much. And that is basically all of theater history too. And then so yeah, it's definitely more work than I think people actually think about it. But at least when you really enjoy it, it's very fun work for sure. And for me, I think of it as a break from my engineering classes, because it is so subjective that it's kind of hard for them to like give you a 0, or like if you like do a problem wrong, they just kind of like crush your soul and say you suck.
Right.
So
negative side 0.
Oh yeah, no, they just stop grading at some point actually.
Right.
And so it's a lot of work, but at least for me, the work that I do in those classes, it's a break and enjoyable, and it feels like.
Well, it also seems nice to be able to apply what you're learning in those theater classes. Maybe not theater, maybe theater history.
Listen.
Honest, I don't know how dense it gets with Shakespeare and stuff. But I'm sure understanding Shakespeare from a historical standpoint would greatly, increase your ability to perform it or direct it.
100%. Just knowing also just knowing how plays were performed back then and how you can change how they're performed now to fix, make it more contextually applicable to now. So you can do a Shakespeare show, but place it in a modern setting.
Place it in New York.
Yeah, and that happens really often actually, which is very interesting. But no, it's very It's very interesting.
So I know a lot of non-theater people that will run into a situation where for whatever reason they have to memorize like a paragraph of text or something. And normally, I know personally, whenever I have to memorize things word for word, whether it was some ROTC stuff, whether it's stuff for a club, whether it's stuff like that, I always struggle. Like, I'm great if you like tell me to read something and get like the deeper meaning, like cool. But then memorizing it word for word and then reciting that has always been something I've had to spend a lot of time and energy on. Do you have any suggestions or tips or tricks that you use?
100. My favorite tip. I don't know who taught me. I think I learned this in high school. So what you do is you take the first letter of each word and you write it out. It looks really insane. I'll like do it in my engineering classes when I'm not paying attention, and people are very confused with what I'm doing. So if you have any, you can do it for anything. If it's like scenes, like if there are people speaking in between you, monologues, I would read it a few times. And then sometimes I'll like try and just get through as much of it as possible and just say it. Maybe it's probably not verbatim. It's usually not verbatim, and just get like the general context. And do I know what sections come after what section to get a general idea of when things are supposed to be said? And then I'll read it over again a few times, and then I will do it and I'll write the first letter of each word. And you like include punctuation. Obviously, you do it exactly the same with just the first letter. And then from there, I will try and go through it all the way through with just the letters. And if I have to, I will have to look at the word because it does take a second. But at some point, you'll be able to get through the entire monologue of just knowing what the first letter of each word is. And then if it's fairly long, I'll cut it in half and cut it into as many sections as I think are manageable to do at a time. And so usually for me, that's probably like 7 or 8 lines is probably a good like chunk of trying to memorize. And then you try and memorize that specific thing. Go off book, don't look at the letters, don't look at the words. And when you don't know a word, you just look at the letter. And so you kind of like break it down from memorizing it just from the letters, and then you can look at a word, to knowing the entire thing by just letters, and then doing it completely by yourself. And then you don't know by yourself, you look at the letters. And then at some point you will just completely know it. So that's like that. I've been doing that for pretty much everything I've done since like high school. But I found that works really well. Yeah. I've told people, there have been people in Senate who are in I don't know what class it is. It's some type of mass comm class where they like one of their final things is like a poem or something, and it works for them. So I feel like it's not just because I'm good at memorizing, and it does actually work, but that is my favorite method. And
it's interesting because I think that's something that it sounds very familiar to something that I had to learn the hard way in engineering, which is interesting. Is coming out of high school, a lot of people they don't see academic coursework in the same domain as like practicing for a sport. Right? Yeah. Like preparing for a test. And like what you just described of you can't just like read it over a ton of times and then hope that you can perform it. Yeah. You have to actually go through the motions of saying it without the thing. But then also you kind of built this framework to help you learn bit by bit. First it's know the context, then it's know that first letter, then it's know the words, and you can always reference back to the last structure that you built. But then eventually you just got to do it without it as much as you can, with referencing those past things. And that's something, I'll tell freshmen all the time in engineering, like, hey, how can I, get through engineering? It's like practice tests. No, yeah. Like literally just by practicing it, approach it like a sport. Just like the monologue there, it's, well, if you're learning how to play baseball, right? We're not just going to teach you how to throw a 70-mile-an-hour curveball the first time you ever learn to pitch, right? You build that structure underneath. First, you start with, okay, this is the pitching motion, right? And then, okay, now that you can throw the ball and actually have someone catch it behind the plate. Now let's go over, okay, get the right grip, right? Okay, now we're going to go over, how can you get it faster? Okay, now that you're consistently getting it fast and kind of building on that structure, and yet when people get to academics, they think, oh, well, I can just like read the book and then do well on the test. Yeah. It's like, no. You got to go through the exact same method of start with the things that are easiest to remember, then build a system you can reference back to, then build a system you can reference back to, you can reference back to, then do it without all of those systems and like reference back to the mental structures that you built to help you get there. Just the same way that you would learn how to play a sport or anything like that is the same way that you can succeed in theater or engineering. Yeah.
And a really useful way of learning and retaining information in these science and math and engineering classes is understanding how the ideas play with each other, right? How they relate to each other, and how some stuff you learn in Physics 1 will be used in dynamics, will be used in machine design, will be used in everything else. So it's also important to realize how they develop and add on, right? First, you learn your order of operations, how to add, First, you learn how to add things, your different operations. Then you learn there's an order to those operations, PEMDAS, and then you can apply that to everything else.
Well, and it even feeds back to something we were talking about before of teaching, right? And the role of good teachers, right?
Yeah.
Because, I know something, even you mentioned beforehand, it's one of the best ways to teach something is to get people excited in it, is to be passionate about it, to maybe tell a backstory of why we're talking about this, to, give those frame of references, put it within the narrative of a story to make it interesting, act excited, show people how it's applicable, and all these things that can build excitement and interest in the topic that helps people understand what they're learning. I've had very few teachers like that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely been my biggest issue coming into engineering, is that when you take theater classes and just kind of general math and science classes, you already kind of know the basics of, what chemistry is for. You know what you're solving the problem for. And then for theater, you're trying to be a better actor. So I think that's kind of harder to correlate. But I know for engineering, when I first came in, it just kind of felt like it was just so much of this information, but no one was telling me why it was important, and I didn't understand the point of the equations, and it would just be this 30 unit equation of things, and I didn't know what any of them were for, and I just remember thinking, I wish you would have given an example of why we're solving this problem, and not just numbers plugging into an equation and then deriving the equation and then writing some free body diagram for some random thing. And I think some professors are definitely getting a lot better at understanding that students are more visual and more visual learning, and then understanding that you have to explain what's going on, because they are industry professionals and they have doctorates in these majors and in these classes, but we have no experience with them at all. And so it was definitely a learning curve of learning how to study. And I think everyone was thermo is the one where if you didn't know how to study, you're going to learn how to study now, and it's going to hurt really badly.
Right.
And it was very correct. And so I think for me, reading the book is super helpful, but then going and making your own deductions of why this is important and making your own problems, I think was something that I've always really liked doing, of deciding okay, well, that's cool, so that's equation, but if I did this in the real world, that's why that would happen. And so I know for me that especially for physics, because ME is so physics based. So I do wish that when we did labs, I think that they would incorporate more of the classroom learning and give you problems when we did them, because I think about that a lot. I think a lot of our labs aren't nearly as physics-based as they should be, considering how much physics is used. But I haven't taken machine design labs, so maybe that will be different. But the other ones passed so far have not been like that.
Well, I find it interesting, kind of the whole conversation bit that you just had. It all relates to skills, right? We learn everything in our classes. This is how theater and mechanical engineering are related. It's all about skills, skills to be a better actor, skills to better understand and implement engineering. And sometimes just learning in classes, you learn, how a gear train works and how to calculate all this stuff, but not, it's useful to use it in different applications in robotics, and learning kind of the interface with it.
Yeah.
It'd be like learning how to code without realizing, you put it in a little Raspberry Pi, you can make it do a lot of things with motors, or, you can code videos, there's...
Right. Which, in many ways, it's more...
You don't like coding very much?
I was not good at it. It was really... MATLAB is actually my mortal enemy in engineering. Flashbacks. It's fine.
Which, and it's just kind of interesting because the university model is more efficient, but is completely the opposite to how we learn things in our everyday life.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
In our everyday life, we learn that, I can sit on this chair because I've sat on this chair and it hasn't broken on me.
Yeah.
I don't do a kinematic analysis of every part of the chair based on the fundamental principles of reality.
Yeah.
Right? It's just, I did this and it worked. Or I did this and it didn't work. And that's how we learn. We learn from this set of experiences, like if you did the physics within the lab, rather than just covering the physical principles in class.
Yeah.
Which funny enough, to segue a little bit, I think is really interesting when we have new people come into like Student Government Senate, right? It was mentioned earlier at the very beginning of the show, parliamentary procedure. It's just it's a way to have an organized meeting, essentially. But it's kind of complicated. There's a thick book of parliamentary procedure and how to do things. And initially when you come in, you're like, why are people saying all these weird things? And why are people moving? Why is there all this motion? What? People are moving to do this, moving to do that? What's going on? And, well, I don't know of anyone, maybe other than you, that learned parliamentary procedure by actually reading the book. People just kind of do it and learn it by doing it. And then when there's a problem, maybe they look it up and they do it and they learn it that way. But most people in Student Government Senate, at least, they learn parliamentary procedure just through being around people that know it and doing it, rather than reading through the book, right? And so, I don't know, your comment about integrating the fundamental analysis into a situation where you're practically using it, I think it would be a good educational model, or at least a better one than is currently being implemented.
Yeah, I definitely think it would help a lot of people just really conceptualize what the point, like, what the equation is doing. Because I just remember a lot for Machine Design 1 and, like, doing the first and second order kinematic equations. Like, to me, I couldn't conceptualize what the point of doing that was until we kind of started working on the project. But even still, when you learn something first and then you get shown what the point is, there's still such a big disconnect, at least for me. I don't know if other people just really got it immediately, but I know for me there was just still this big disconnect.
Would have rather it started the other way around.
Of being like, okay, this thing is moving, and it's moving, so then we can figure out what this is for. But I think because it was done the opposite way, I just never quite was able to connect them as well as I think I should have, for considering that was like the whole point of the class.
Right. Working up the ladder from what you know to what you don't know, rather than just starting in the domain of not knowing and then slowly but surely getting to what you do know, and you've lost all that stuff that was started when you just didn't know what was going on.
Exactly. Like, I think the progression of building, of learning in this just isn't quite as good as it should be for a lot of things. And so I think a lot of times students get so overwhelmed at the beginning that by the time they understand what's happening, they're so far behind in the class that they spend the rest of the semester catching up. And that's why some people are stressed during finals, because they're like trying to learn the last fourth of the class once they finally figured out the rest of what was going on.
Once the first 3/4 was about.
Yeah. They just you just go in head first, and there's no kind of slow introductory period to these classes. And because even though a lot of things that we do build on each other, like fluid dynamics is still fluid dynamics. We still haven't necessarily talked about it. So even though a lot of things we do are very similar to how solids react, it's still different. And so I think having the slow build would be a little more helpful for people.
Definitely.
It would be nice to have, for mechanical engineering specifically, more of a gap between, or less of a gap between thermo and fluids. If there was a second semester, because I know certain colleges do it where they'll have thermo semester 1 is mostly up to the second law, and then the second semester starts second law and goes a little bit more into more of the fluids and heat transfer type stuff.
That would be my dream.
And they also cut out other classes that we have because LSU, I guess, wants to overload us. Yeah, no, we have some of the most classes.
What are we taking that we don't need to be taking?
That is up to the college engineering to decide.
Well, they're adding more classes in the beginning. They're taking away CM 1020 and adding 2 freshman semester mechanical engineering courses, which I think is a great idea.
Actually, that's really interesting.
Because when I was in mechanical engineering, until a little after my sophomore year, I didn't really fully understand what mechanical engineers did or what it meant to work in a project. So I joined Bengal Robotics, worked on some robots. I was like, oh, this is cool. I want to switch my major to biological engineering because I want to do robotics with. So it's nice that they aren't just thrown in. CM 1020 really doesn't tell you much about mechanical engineering. It's all using SolidWorks, which is a 3D modeling program. So you don't really know what you're doing until you get into sophomore design, which you typically take your first semester sophomore year, but a lot of people push it off because you're taking thermo for the first time. Not a very easy time to be taking 18 hours of classes which you've had a lot of 18-plus hour semesters. Because with doing theater and mechanical engineering, don't they sometimes require you to take 20-something hours?
Oh, yeah. I think probably up until... Maybe, I think it was last fall was the first semester since I think for 2 years straight, I took at least 20 to 21 hours. I think the most I took was 23. But I will say, in all fairness, for that semester, I feel like I have to preface it. I promise you, I'm like not crazy. One of them was like, I worked on a film studio, and that was a 3 credit hour course. It was an internship. So that was 20. It's not that terrible. And then I always take aerial silks, which has to be a 1 hour class, but it's a silks class. It is hard. I'm not discrediting it, but it's my little dance class. And then I was taking a practicum, which was me working in a box office. So technically 5 of them were not as crazy as it sounds. But 18 hours is still kind of a lot. But yeah. I've taken, which is really just kind of funny to say. It's fun to like shock people with that one.
Yeah.
Because most people take 15 hours is a good load, 18 is a lot,
12 is
a
sometimes
nice
hard
load.
in engineering.
Oh,
I mean, yeah.
I'm taking 13 now and I'm dying.
Yeah.
Taking 13 next semester, I've never been so excited, but also terrified because they're like all engineering classes.
Especially with senior design, which is a full-time job.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, and talking about just being absurdly busy, also involved in things, obviously something that I want to talk about is you've been Speaker of the LSU Senate for the last year. Obviously, so for those that don't know, LSU Student Senate is, based loosely off of real legislative bodies. Yeah. It's kind of, if you combine the House and the Senate of most real-world legislative bodies, that's kind of how we get our representation. And then every year, we elect someone to be Speaker, and the role of the Speaker is essentially just to facilitate the meetings, right? You're calling on people, you're making sure everything's done, you're making sure we're following parliamentary procedure, trying to make sure that the Senate body can't be sued for doing something wrong, everything like that. So obviously that's a big endeavor in leadership. Has there been anything over the past year through being Speaker that you've learned about leading a room, leading a group of people like that, or doing a job like that you don't think most people would expect?
I think one thing that I always bring up is that no matter what you do, when you do a position like this, your goal is to have that body's interest at mind, because that is why you were elected, and because of how many people are in that body and in SG as a whole, because even though you're presiding over Senate, you're also like doing everything for like SG in certain aspects, and that's like 300, 500, like however many people are in this organization to be, I have no idea. But that's so many people. So when you're focusing on doing the job of what you're elected to do, there are going to be people who are going to like just not love it and just be annoyed that you are doing the job that you're supposed to be doing. And I think that's a difficult thing to kind of come to terms with, because I think especially at coming like to theater, like it's the, like people, you want people to like you, like that's a human thing, and that's just not always going to happen. And it's almost never like a personal thing. If it is, that's their problem, but it's never really a personal thing. It's just how organizations work. And I think for me that was such a difficult kind of thing to learn, because I didn't expect that to happen. And you just like kind of learn to like not take things personally, because if you know that you are doing the role that you're supposed to be doing and the job you were elected to do, then it kind of doesn't matter what other people think and how they think you're doing the job, because at the end of the day, like you have to trust what you're doing. And I think that's just a difficult thing to learn. And it was difficult for me to learn as a 5th year. And like, I mean, I'm 22 years old, and so that's never something that I'd really thought about, but I think it does kind of help and correlate to a lot of things in the real world of, with the amount of people you're going to be doing shows for or engineering like things with, like if you feel confident in what you're doing, not everyone's going to love how you're doing it or why you're doing it or what you're doing, but if you feel good about it and you like it, then you can't focus on like what is happening with them. Yeah. Because like if you did that, you would just be overwhelmed with like anxiety and stress. But I think that's just a big thing that I didn't really think about when I came into that position, because in my head I was like, oh, just a club, it's okay. But then it's still a very important club where a lot of things get done, and so you cannot please everyone. And that's just kind of those like difficult lessons to learn, because like I would love to please everyone, but I mean everyone's so different, so
right,
you just physically cannot do that.
Especially in a kind of governmental thing.
Yeah,
like that.
Even worse in that sense.
Yeah, right. There's always going to be not only people that disagree with each other, but then they're going to go and form coalitions to fight each other, and then you have to stand in that room and make sure that they're like civil and not and fair. Make sure that the process is fair. And even if you really agree with a certain person or a certain group in the body, the role there is to make sure that everyone can be heard and all the ideas can be put on the table, not just to kind of shove one way of doing things. And so that's probably a pretty hard position, and it's different than a lot of leadership roles, because there are a lot of leadership roles where you're kind of setting the vision, you're setting the, you do get to be that guiding kind of policy point in the organization, whereas a role like kind of Speaker and SBT of Student Senate, there's almost more of an expectation of neutrality and impartiality.
Yeah, it was definitely very strange going from being so involved, at least in the academic standpoint, of like passing.
What are some of the things you've done while in student government?
Oh, yeah.
Because a lot of people don't know. They think of student government, they're like, oh, well, there's people that want to be elected every year, and all that. What are some things that you've done?
So honestly, I think I loved being speaker, but I think when I was chair for academic affairs, it was probably my favorite leadership position role I've ever had, just because of how connected I got to be with admin and faculty and really understand the process of making change on campus, which is simultaneously easier and harder than I would have anticipated.
How so?
I think for the most part, admin really does care a lot about helping students and doing what they think is best for students, but they don't always have the voice of students to go off of. And when they have those voices, they feel like they can better help them. And I think I just got very lucky, possibly with my people I worked with in academic affairs, that they were so supportive of every choice we had. And if we came up with an idea that wasn't either feasible or just they kind of had concerns about it, they would give us an alternative route. And so I think the reason we were able to get so much stuff done in academic affairs is because we worked so closely with them and did so much compromise on everything. And I think the one that I am probably the most proud of was Dean's List, because that was something that people worked on for such a long time before I even got to LSU, before I got into SG. I didn't even know that people had worked on it when we were working on it. But I mean, it used to be the 15 credit hours. You had to be enrolled in 15 to be on Dean's List. And like, that's not full time. It's a little unfair, in my opinion. And so when we went to Dr. Bach and we were like, we want to change it to 12 credit hours, we initially wanted to change presidents and Dean's List to 12 credit hours, and she pretty much just looked at us and was very blunt and said, they are not going to change president's list. And we were like, okay, why? And they said, too prestigious, that is very high honor. And we said, okay, Dean's List? And she said, we can probably do that. So that's when we just kind of did a lot of research, and we looked at the other SEC schools. We were the only SEC school besides A&M that had a Dean's List that was 15 credit hours, and then we looked at every single degree program adjacently. Not everyone. There's like 400. But we looked at most of them and said, for like your last year, probably 75 to 80% of them, you don't have to be, you're in between 12 to 14 credit hours. And so if you're telling these students they don't have to be in 15, why would you make them take some extra random class that they might not want to take because they're a senior, if they're tired, maybe they have a job.
Right.
But why should that discredit the fact that they're still getting above a 3.5? And so when you come to them with this information that they probably hadn't thought about before, I remember they were really shocked when we told them how many degree programs you didn't have to take 15 credit hours the whole time to graduate on time. And I think having that information and having the students fight for it just really gave them an opportunity to make change. And so it was easy to talk to them, but then the process of having to do things is never something students really think about. I mean, I had no idea how policy change worked. I had no idea how things actually got implemented, but it had to go through faculty senate. It had to go through like 3 different committees. Then it had to get signed by the faculty senate president, and then by the academic affairs office, and then the president, and then it got implemented. And even then it got, I think, signed possibly at the beginning of January of last year, of 2022, but then it didn't get to be implemented until this past fall because things are already so set in stone by the time school starts. So we probably started that initiative spring of 2021, maybe fall 2021, but it didn't really get to happen until
for like
just
2 years.
Recently.
Yeah.
And so I think things are definitely possible to get happen. So that's probably my favorite. But we also did the W's, which I think, I wouldn't say is a favorite, but more personal, because that one I felt personally related to, which is why I wanted to do it.
Meaning you can W more classes than you could before?
You can W more classes. Also, the tier system is gone. That was my main goal. I thought the tier system was not well thought out, mainly because I've been over the final tier system hours cutoff for a very long time.
Meaning that depending on how many hours you've taken, you can have different amounts of W's.
Yeah, so I think it's from 0 to 30, you got 3. 30 to 60 or 75, you got another 3. And then 75 to 100? I should probably know. It's another 3, but then once you hit like 100 or something, you got like 1.
You're like done.
And I was like already over that, and I still had 2.5 years left, and I said, I need more.
Yeah.
This is not going to work. And so...
Especially when a large majority of college students take more than the 4 years that they have.
Oh, exactly.
You're inevitably going to have more hours than that.
No, yeah, exactly. And so that was another one where they were all for it. We just had to go through the process of getting it done. And I think because not everyone is going to stay in student government or in Senate in these positions for like 4 or 5 years, a lot of things that are really great ideas don't always get done because they don't follow through within the next one. One thing that I would say I'm proud about, but I didn't technically do, I was just chair when it happened, was the ASL course. I think that's probably the most impressive thing that I would say Senate has gotten to be able to do. Like, we still talk about it to the day about getting an ASL course, and I know people are working on getting a second one, to get the second one so it can be an actual like
American Sign Language course.
American Sign Language. And so I think that's one that I am adjacently proud of, because I was there when it happened, but I was like from the sidelines going like, this is so cool. More so than like actually writing anything for it.
Right.
Yeah, shout out to Miles McClendon, who made a Google form petition that got over 850.
It was so good.
My Google went off. Yeah, signatures for people that would be interested in taking the class. It definitely doesn't have that big of a class. I think it's between 23, 25 typically. But it would be awesome to be able to have more professors. I've been waiting to take it as my foreign language class. I hope by the time I graduate it will be, but they need a sequence. So,
but I know, I think that's one that a lot of people love. And then just bringing back like the library for 24 hours during dead week and finals was one that wasn't even like legislation. It was just something that we realized wasn't happening and hadn't been happening for a while. And so we just emailed the dean of the library and we were like, hey, can we like be open for longer again? Right. People really like that. And they said, oh, yeah, we like forgot about that.
This whole like students first thing, can we actually like open the library?
Yeah, like can it like happen? And then I remember one of some senator emailed about having longer hours for the study rooms or something. And so I think a lot of people also don't realize that a lot of things happen kind of in the background. Not everything has to be legislation that's passed. A lot of it's just emails of letting admin and faculty be aware of what student wants, because students don't always know that they could just email. They could just email Dr. Bach if they wanted to. I think they might be scared, which is a fair thing to be. Yeah. But when it's coming from people and saying, here's what all of my senators are saying, they're more inclined to be like, oh, like that's a good idea. We didn't thought about that. And so a lot of things just kind of are done through email and just done through conversations and less of formalized past legislation. Yeah. And so I think that's where it comes in. Like, it's easier and harder to certain extents to get things done. I think those are the ones that I'm like the most proud of.
Definitely. And I mean, some of the really interesting takeaways even from those that, I always say that I'm continually amazed by how many ways LSU student government is emblematic of real world governance. Yeah. In both the good ways and the bad ways. I think you see with some of these initiatives, some of the most kind of impactful big initiatives, they take a while. And these are like colleges, right? This is within a college umbrella, right? Yeah. Even trying to, change the tier system or change the dean's list, that took 2 years. I know there's a project I've been working on to implement things, and we passed the funding for it, and it's all good, but it just takes time to actually purchase them, then install them. And like, these are things that take 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 years. Yeah. And so, definitely, whether you're an elected representative or whether you're just someone trying to make a change in anything, the planning fallacy is kind of recognized mental heuristic where people always think it'll take less time than it does to complete a project. Yeah. Don't be discouraged when things take time. Stay through it. Keep pushing. Keep sending an email. Okay, they didn't respond once. Send another one. Okay, send another one. Okay, now there's another problem that popped up. Like, just being really kind of audacious and not letting the lack of response get on you and keeping at it. Things will always take longer than it seems like they will take, but that doesn't mean they're less worth doing. Yeah,
I think that was always my biggest thing when I was chair, is just telling people that you're going to get told no like so many more times than you're going to get told yes. And that isn't a bad thing. I think it's personally pretty good because at least if you're being told no, you're being told something, and a response is always better than being ghosted.
Yep.
And I think it's one of those where that's another just kind of lesson that you don't think about in college and you didn't think that you would learn in an organization, that it's so much better to be annoying than it is to be annoyed about a system.
Yeah.
And if you're annoyed that something's happening, I would rather be the annoying person who's just emailing someone like 20 times and telling them that this is wrong and so many people think it's annoying or it's not benefiting students. Because if people are annoyed with me, then like that sucks. I'm sorry. That's okay.
but maybe
I mean,
you change something for the positive.
Yeah,
right.
and then that way at least now I know that I'm trying to get it done. But it can be so discouraging when you're doing these clubs and organizations and trying to make change that it can really like shoot people down. And I think when I came into SG as a junior, and I think having so much time at LSU kind of helped me a little bit. But I mean, I was, my freshman year self and me are very different. I think if I had come in as a freshman and then I emailed admin and they ignored me or they just told me no, like that would shoot my confidence. I would just be done for. I would have not made it out. And I think a really big thing that I really push in Senate, hopefully, is that like they're going to tell you no, but it's not personal and you cannot make it personal. They probably do want to help you 95% of the time, but you just have to like keep going and like you have to put in the effort and the energy to get the things you want done. It's usually never just a one-time thing. Like you said, like no one ever realizes how much work things take because they do think you can just send an email and they'll be like, oh my God, yeah, we'll for sure do that. It like is never like that.
Right.
And it's not like that for almost anything in the world either. And so I think that's a good real life lesson too.
Devil's in the details on that.
Oh, yeah.
Real quick, station identification at the top of the hour. This is 91.1 KLSU Baton Rouge. Thank you, FCC. But yeah, no, and that's like even you said, you might send an email and they might say, yeah, that's great, let's do that. But if you never have a follow-up on, okay, what's our timeline? What are the details? What is, like, someone saying, yes, this is a good thing to do, normally, like, nothing's happening. You say, all right, will it be done by this day?
Yeah.
Okay, it won't be done by that day. Why? What's standing in the way of it being done by this day? Okay, well, let's do this. And really fleshing out all the details on policy work. I mean, that's something, a lot of people think, engage with, the national media or politicians, and they think policy's easy, right? It's as much as just, write a sentence, pass it, done. But one of the things I realized a couple of years ago when working with governmental policy was, like, policy is way more complicated than anyone thought. Like, we are on this enormous structure of current policy that's been sorted out, and any change requires so many different permissions and so much communication and so much thought and so many details that it is very difficult, but hopefully in a good way, because hopefully that difficulty prevents any very bad changes from happening.
Yeah.
Not always, but, in intention. And hopefully any changes that do happen, there are so many checks that it has to go through that you just get a better result. And one of the other things I thought you said that was really interesting was how on so many of the initiatives you work on, you've made positive progress, but it was almost always a compromise. It was never 100% the idea came in with. And, if you look just within society so long, the kind of polarized nature of, well, no, it's all or nothing, right? We're correct, you're wrong. We're correct, you're wrong. And this all or nothing approach doesn't normally work in practical situations.
No, I definitely think that it's a very detrimental mindset for a lot of things because, I mean, like, people don't function at a 100% all or nothing like methodology anyway. Like, you compromise with yourself. You can't expect to not have to compromise with other people. Like, we're all different. We're all coming from different places. Like, no one is exactly like you in any way, shape, or form. And it's so much more detrimental to what you want to do and the change you want to make if you just decide that everything that you want to do is the exact way to do it, when there are people who are willing to compromise. And they're not compromising because they don't agree with maybe your 100% vision, but they realistically, at least admin sense, probably know how to get things done in a more efficient way. And so realistically, like, back to Dean's List, if we had tried to do a policy that was changing Dean's List and President's List, they would have just, like, said no. Because we already knew that they didn't want to change President's List. It would have been it wouldn't have been beneficial or time-worthy to even try to do that. And if you had gone in with the mindset that we specifically want both of them, it has to be both of them, well, then it just like wouldn't have happened at all. And then it just would have been a waste of my time and everyone else's time, when you could have just compromised and been like, okay, yeah, like, it sucks. I wanted it to be President's List and Dean's List too, but I mean, like, Dean's List is still, I feel like, is still such like a very, very beneficial
Probably
thing.
affects more people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, oh, for sure it does. I'm not getting a 4.0 anytime soon, even a little. So that affected me a lot. I know, like, Devin, my roommate, she hadn't been on Dean's List for so long because she had finished so much of her classes that she had been at like 13, 14 hours for so many of her past semesters, because she wasn't going to overload herself just to get on Dean's List. That her final semester this past fall, I think she was at like 12, 13 hours that she finally got on Dean's List.
Hey.
And so she took pictures, really cute actually. So I think just even affecting the amount of people that it would is so 10 times more beneficial, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Like, I didn't do it because I was like, I want to tell people that I gave them Dean's List and President's List. I'm just glad that it happened for people. And I think when you go into that mindset, compromise becomes so much more of a better option, because it will actually make the change you want it to. And then hopefully, like, later, maybe in like 2 years, they'll realize that Dean's List changing was really great and it made people more like want to study more, because if you know that you're taking 12 hours and you can get on Dean's List, maybe you'll study harder to actually do it. But then if you didn't, maybe you're not going to want to try as hard, because if you're already not in the 15 credit hours, who cares if you get one more B than an A? So I think maybe that'll help someone later, when I'm no longer here, gone from existence, that maybe someone can change and make it President's List at some point. And I think just the slowly, like the slow building of it is more beneficial than trying to get everything you want done all the time.
Incremental positive progress is better than stagnation.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And too often the all or nothing approach leads to stagnation rather than a slow progression.
It's also exhausting.
Yeah.
I mean, like, we're students. I think we always forget that about everything we do that's extracurricular. Like, it's supposed to be fun. And when you go in with the idea that everything has to be perfect and done the way that you think it needs to be done, or it's not good, like, that's detrimental to your health and exhausting. Like, it's a club. We're students. We have to have time to be people and to study, and it's so rewarding to see things done in general at all, that, at least to me, I would much rather have a small part of something I did get done than all of it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's also, and you mentioned that we're students, college students especially, but you see this in a lot of areas of policy progression. It also kind of displays a general kind of arrogance of thinking that, yes, the way that I know it is the best way to do it, because I know everything about this topic and there's no information that could change my mind. Like, really? You think you know more than the person that's been working in that office for 20 years?
Yeah.
Now, you definitely have a different perspective that's worth bringing to the table. But, the art of compromise is also the art of realizing that there are things you don't know that can play into what the best decision is.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
No, that vibe kind of reminds me of like those dads who will yell at their kids while they play football. It's that same type of arrogance.
Yeah.
It just reminded me of that. I thought it was funny.
I'm sitting 100 feet away, but that umpire was wrong. That umpire that was 2 feet away was wrong. I know what it was. I saw it. I'm better.
Well, sometimes the umpires are wrong. I do yell at umpires.
I mean, that's fair. I played soccer. Refs are kind of dumb sometimes. I get it.
You played soccer, right?
I did. 14 years.
Ooh, soccer, not football?
Yeah, no, soccer. We were never good enough for it to be even considered football, even a little.
You have to be a certain level to be considered football?
I would say so. I went to a performing arts high school.
Gotcha.
Like, our athletics were pretty good, but we were definitely not District 1.
The sports teams and the plays won a lot more than the ones in the high school. Like, when there's a play about a sports team, right, that always comes up.
Honestly,
and wins.
actually, I feel like the ones I've seen, they all like lose.
Really?
They're like tragedies most of the time, where they're like sad. Because like no one wants to see a play about just like a sports team winning. I feel like movies are better. Like when you see movies of sports teams, it's way more fun.
Yeah.
But like plays have just like some level of like trying to be too serious.
Yeah.
So like for adding sports, it has to be sad.
They have to lose.
So like someone dies or like someone
rips their ACL.
Yeah,
right
like that happened
in
both of those things actually happened in a play.
Jeez.
and they lost like the game or something. So, and movies, yes, though movies about sports are way more fun than plays.
Yeah.
About sports.
Well, that's I wonder how many more athletes' careers are tragedies and or not. But because you got a lot of people that really want to play sports that snap an ACL, things like that. But yeah.
Ooh, I felt that. That was my biggest fear playing soccer. Biggest fear now, still, actually. That sounds.
Your ACL specifically, or?
I think so. I don't know why. I don't know. Never broken anything. So I'm like, I get nervous.
That's the discussion I had with another person that does a lot of acting recently. Was the idea that, all right, is life a comedy or a tragedy? And well.
I mean, it depends on your perspective, actually.
Exactly. At a certain point, it's however you want to interpret it. You can interpret it both ways and be 100% correct.
Because comedies can be tragedies if you say it the right way. And same with the other way.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah.
But on that cheery note.
Anyway.
No, thank you for that. Wow. Okay, that's cool. Yeah. I think a reoccurring theme on the show has been communication of technology and science and how, the interplay of that and other fields of thought, whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's philosophy, whether it's science, whether it's acting, whether it's legislating and policy, it seems like there's always certain threads that run through things. And a discussion I was having with someone the other day of what constitutes truth is that which in multiple different situations of analysis always comes up. It's the thread that runs through different perspectives and different ways of thinking. The thing that is true among all of them is kind of the deepest truth. And so it's been really interesting talking about that. I bring that up because I think this is going to be our last live show of the semester. So that was, a little brief recap of all of the different kind of topics and things that we've talked about. I think before we wrap up, one, thank you very much for coming on the show. That was really interesting.
Thank you for having me.
I think your experiences through university and the things that you've done have been really interesting, really beneficial through student government, both through the policy changes and then in this last semester growing into the role of SPT, working with people and becoming a really good leader within Senate. And so that's been really, really good to work with, and I'm glad you were able to do so much good through those roles. Sure. And then provide the interesting perspective of the theater and mechanical engineering that you can't find many people that have that perspective.
Yeah.
So that's definitely interesting. And I think before we sign off today, there's a couple people that we want to thank just for the semester, whether it's Jackson Blackman or Nick Freeman. That have both been instrumental in getting the show going. There's been multiple times where we've called them at weird hours saying, hey, we're locked out of the building, or hey, this piece of equipment doesn't work, and just working with us to get this going. They've been very essential and critical to getting us going. David, who's helped with some recording things.
Thank you to all of our guests who have appeared on our show. It's been awesome talking to y'all. I think I knew a lot of y'all, but it was great meeting the ones that I didn't. And want to thank my brother for making the theme song that we've used all semester. It's
Thank you. Yes.
one of my top played songs in Spotify now.
With that said, thank you again to everyone that listened. As always, I hope the last week was great and your next week is even better. Thank you. This has been Colin Raby and Julius Pilata. Go Tigers.
Go Tigers.